But as far as from the Regen news, the biggest news is that we've got a retreat going on now. So I think Regen is trying to get a sense for what we want to be doing going forward. And, the idea is to come up with some innovations, but not too risky, because we want to stay in business, going forward as well. So we've got a really interesting group of people here to help us kind of refine a business plan, I think. So it's kind of interesting. But I think the main topic that I wanted to cover was the sheep grazing work. And we have Jamie here. Jamie's a partner with the sheep grazing outfitter. I mean, it's basically husband and wife, Jamie, I think, right? So it's this is
he should at some point, I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'll just give you a kind of rough overview of what the sheep grazing methodology is. And there were going to be some other people that just couldn't join because they had conflicts to talk about some of the fiber shed, there were some people from the fiber shed organization, but they weren't able to join this meeting. So with the sheep grazing methodology, what it is we are trying to reward a practice, and the practice is grazing high density sheep for short durations. And there's Tony. That practice has been shown to have great regenerative outcomes. And initially, when this project started, it was a research project out of USDA, out of the NRCS. It's the Conservation Innovation Grant Program. And the initial interest was in getting carbon credits for these vineyards, because the sheep grazing practice is supposed to produce a lot of carbon, and they thought that it would make sense to kind of generate carbon credits. The problem was that the vineyard owners would be paying more for the soil sampling than they'd be getting back in credits, so it didn't really make sense. And then we came up with something that was more practical within this environmental stewardship initiative. And that's where we came up with this kilo sheep hour. So it's basically the number of sheep. Hey, Robert, just see it. Oh, there we go. That's where we came up with the kilo sheep hour. So it's basically the number of sheep times the number of grays divided by 1,000. The number of sheep divided by number of sheep times the number of hours divided by 1,000. And that's a kilo sheep hour credit. And the basic idea is that practice in itself is creating regenerative outcomes, and that should just be rewarded. It's super simple. We don't have to jump through a lot of hoops. It's easy to get people on board. And I think, did we just lose Jamie and Robert?
No, we're here.
Oh, they're still there. Okay, it just went off. I'm just going to expand my window. Sorry, but it seemed like somebody dropped off. So, do you guys mind talking a little about kind of what you do and kind of the issues that you run into with your shepherds and with the change in the California law? Just kind of summarize that, because I don't want to put you on the spot. Is that
you go?
What I'm trying to do is just set the context of basically why we did this was to help people like Jamie and Robert. They're the grazing operators that are doing this work, and we don't want them to go out of business. Be just the opposite. We want more people like them. So we're trying to create an initiative to help them keep going and also help other people get going. But if you set the context.
As I can, Ned. So when we started in 2010 putting sheep in vineyards, I think that the required wages for our guys was a little low. So the Department of Labor had a set rate, and it was a little low. We kind of overpaid, I guess, at the time, but it wasn't an industry standard. So what the government did, or the Department of Labor did, is they decided it was too low, and then and we were supposed to be self-regulating, the sheep ranchers were, but we, of course, you can't let anybody self-regulate. So they kind of punished us for that. This is my opinion, it's not fact, but kind of how it all went down. So they punished us for that, and we went from about $2,000 a month per guy, plus room and board, visa, travel, airfare, cell phones, everything. They have no expenses, we're going to be paying close to $5,000 in 2025. We're currently paying $4,000, plus room and board, everything. Our guys don't have any expenses. So what happened in about a 4-year window is our labor went up kind of 1,000%, really. I mean, it doubled. And I know that's 200%, but
so I'm gonna hop in here. Our vineyard grazing started. We wanted to research what's happening with the sheep grazing vineyards. Like, are they actually doing something in the vineyard? Are they increasing carbon, nitrogen, all what's happening there? So that was kind of where the research started. But then we kind of knew this jump in labor was coming down the pipeline. So that's kind of where the carbon credits came in to maybe try to fulfill that.
We charge the vineyards a per acre cost. We sell our lamb, and we sell our wool, and we fire graze. So we do fire prevention grazing in the summer months, and we still aren't going to be able to keep up with the increased cost of labor. There's just not enough margins in it. There's not a big enough margin in the lambs and the grazing. And we're going to get past, there's a breaking point in the vineyard grazing where it's just cheaper to use a tractor. So I'm trying not to pass every one of those breaking points. If we can get everybody or everything or whatever different revenues to kind of come up to a sustainable level, and we just need to find another revenue stream to make the sheep thing work with the regenerative, with all that kind of all piled in together. At the end of the day, it's got to be financially feasible. And we got to we're just not quite there. It's this year it's going to be $100,000 alone in the jump in wages. We're going to go from $3,800 a month to $44,000.
At least we don't know exactly.
We don't know exactly till January 1st when the DOL releases their new wage information. So they have an estimate, and then they have the reality. And so far, we're about $400 to $500 a month over the estimate that they started with. So they said we were going to end at $4,800, but that's just not going to be the case if we continue down our path. The estimate, if we stay down the kind of the increased as it is, will probably be around 54, 52. But we'll be at least $5,000, but we don't know.
Yeah.
But every year it's been higher than the estimate, so we kind of have to expect that. Anyway,
that's the nutshell.
Anybody wants to go down a rabbit hole, we can go down that too. But that's that in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. And I mean, so basically we're trying to fill a deficit. And that was our target. We just have one pilot vineyard that we're working with, and we're using data that was collected last year as part of the SIG grant. And we know roughly, what that deficit is for the grazing that was done in that vineyard. And to meet that deficit, we used that deficit to calculate the price of the credits. So we knew how many credits were generated based on the number of kilo sheep hours that were generated through the grazing practice, and then we could just basically divide that target by the number of credits, and we came up with a price per credit of about $23.50. So that's how the credit price was set. It's based on a fundamental. Well, it's a real need. So we want to try to get this money to the grazing operator, and to do that, we need to get this much per credit. Go ahead, Howard. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to understand better how the calculation or the correlation, if it was looser, was made to demonstrate the soil carbon growth to come up with that 1,000-hour measure. I think its simplicity is very elegant, and we've been looking not in the grazing context, but in other soil related, to come up with simple, intuitive, and logical factors that aren't necessarily requiring lab data. And so if I could hear a little more about how the story went from when you began doing the research stage, which sounds like about 10 years ago, to having arrived at a number that there's enough confidence to go to market? How much of that was science, how much of it was art, and how much of it is just economic necessity?
All right, so it's mostly economic necessity, I would say, and this is really based on the practice. So the idea is, and unfortunately, the researcher Kelsey Brewer, who was working on this project, wasn't able to join this session. He'll be at next week. There's going to be a Regen Network community meeting, which is kind of a larger thing. So if you can attend that, I don't know if Jamie and Robert can make that, but it's, I mean, if I think you were thinking about making it, I think Kelsey will be there as well, and he can talk about the research. But the basic idea is that this practice has been proven to produce regenerative outcomes in this area. And that's what we're going on. So we're not counting directly, you know, the credit isn't tied to the amount of carbon that's sequestered. It's not tied to the soil health. It's not tied to anything like that directly. That said, we are collecting data to measure those things. So 15% of the credit is set aside for data collection. And that the data that's collected is used to understand the relationship between the practice and the outcomes. So that's where we understand, you know, how much carbon is actually being sequestered. How is the soil improving? What soil properties are changing, and are they changing for the better or the worse, and things like that. But those data are used for knowledge generation. It's really meant to improve our knowledge of the relationship between the practice and the outcomes. That's not directly tied to the value of the credit, the pricing of the credit. So the pricing of the credit is effectively based on the need. It's, you know, we need this much. If these guys are going to keep going, and we're going to try to, you know, it's going to be attractive to get other people going, we need to get this much money to the shepherds or to the grazing operators. And I'll say, you know, the way the credit is split up, 15% of the credit is taken right off the top for data collection. That's for the knowledge generation. Then the remaining 85% is split. 35% goes to the vineyard owner, 65%. And when we calculated how much has to go, I mean, the fundamental thing driving this is how much has to go to the grazing operator. Then all the other, you know, numbers, you know, the amount going to the vineyard owner and for data collection comes out as a residual. Basically, the main thing is we need to get, the target is to get the grazing operators this much money. So we're going to set the price of the credit so that's accomplished.
I thank you for the explanation. I appreciate the need to get the funding to the grazing operator. Why is it necessary to induce the vineyard owner if they're getting the service of having their could I understand why we have to induce the vineyard owner? I have no trouble understanding why the grazers need to be supported in this enterprise.
Yeah, no, this comes up a lot, and you know, there is this perception that, you know, the vineyard owners certainly don't need the money. You know, they've got plenty, but we are trying to also encourage vineyard owners to adopt these regenerative practices. I mean, a lot of them are adopting them because it just makes sense. They're seeing, I mean, the benefits that they're getting are pretty strong. But through, when we started this, I was interviewing some of the different vineyard owners, and there's some that and I've never verified this, but you know, they say that like in Australia and New Zealand, it works just the opposite, that the grazing operators pay the vineyard owners to do the grazing because it's a very different dynamic. And they thought, you know, well, you know, we're providing a service for the grazing operators, and you know, so it's this two-way thing. It just depends on your perspective.
Yep.
Working with Fibershed, you know, they're certainly proponents for the grazing operators, but we also want to be, you know, keep the vineyard operators in this loop, and they should be getting something. And then it's, you know, how much should it be? And, you know, it wasn't anything scientific coming up with, you know, a third of the remaining goes to the vineyard owners, 2/3 goes to the grazing operator. That's just what seemed to make sense. And as this evolves, we can always change that. So that's not set in stone. The methodology, this is really a pilot methodology. I'm sure it's flawed. I'm sure there are going to be some issues that are popping up, and we can improve it, but we want to get something out and going and test this whole idea going forward.
Was there a process of some kind in making that allocation, or is it really just a gut feel?
For what?
I mean, were the vineyard operators engaged in a way to find out what their trigger would be, or I mean, on what data was available to understand, assuming it's not just a single operator, that there are a number of operators, and it sounds like there's a fixed allocation across the credit class. So I was just curious, as this methodology or this credit class is being developed, what input did you have? You obviously have good access to the economics of the grazers. And did you have similar visibility to the, let's call them the land stewards, the vineyard owners, to understand what they needed to feel like this was worthwhile? How'd you get to that point?
That was mostly a gut feeling at this point. It was just through interviews. And it was only a handful of vineyard owners, so it wasn't extensive. It wasn't any scientific work. It was really a gut feeling and something that seemed to make sense. And like I say, we can always adjust that going forward. But we wanted to start with something that was a gut sense that made sense.
So the sampling comes off the top, and then the balance is essentially equally split between the grazers and the vineyard owners.
Well, 1/3 goes to the vineyard, 2/3 to the grazers.
Oh, okay. I misheard. I thought it was okay.
It's 35% to the vineyard owner, 65% to the grazing operator.
85. Okay. Sorry, I didn't get that the first time. So the rough justice.
And I think as a grazer, yeah.
Go ahead.
But Ned, you did say 15% off the top for the data management, the sampling, right? Okay.
Yep. Jamie, were you saying
And I think
something?
as grazers, I mean, I think, can you hear us? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I think as grazers, a lot of the landowners we talk to them say that, they don't want money. It's kind of seems like kind of a popular view, but I think some of them do, and I think it feels right to involve them in the process. I mean, it does feel right as somebody on the ground working with these guys and letting sheep go to their letting sheep graze their property, having them invested in part of the process it makes sense on our end as well. So I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think the people that are currently in the practice, so the vineyard owners that are currently using sheep and they're currently engaged, like Fetzer Bonterra, they've been with us for 12 years. I don't think this is a good deal for them. But I think that the new people, anybody you're getting on board, it's going to be the sales pitch to kind of get, hey, you're going to share part of this and get them on board. Like Gergich has already told me he's going to kick that money down to me if that does happen. If we go through with all this, that he's going to kick it down because he sees, we're doing all the work, and it's the people that are currently on board is not the people I'm worried about. It's the people we add to the pile. And there's the perception, and part of the reason why we started the research was ground compaction. So that, like, when we first got the SAR grant, that because the biggest hurdle to get a vineyard manager into using sheep was, they said a sheep's foot was a ground compactor. That's because that's the name of a ground compacting implement. So anyway, the first 3 years of the SAR grant that we had before it got with Fibershed and got as big as it did was mainly focused on all the woes of vineyard managers and what they were saying for their biggest negatives for adding sheep. So that was an original 10-year ago, kind of thought process. And so for me, it's still it's maybe not who I'm working with currently, but who anybody or a grazer might be working with going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting context. Thank you.
Wondering if, okay, let me yield to Walt. I'll wait and offer a comment when he's done.
Yeah, go ahead, Walt.
I'm just curious. It's not a thing here in the Algarve, Portugal, where we are. I've got a very small vineyard of my own. It's like 1,400 vines. And we've got a little flock of sheep, like 20 sheep. And somebody was visiting our farm some years ago and suggested to me, yeah, there's this whole business in California called woolly weeders. And, they get free, fodder for their sheep, and they get paid by all these vineyards in California. And so the idea intrigued me, and we tried to run our sheep through the vine rows, but it was a disaster because we use sheep for grazing pasture here. And I'm totally on board with the Alan Savory holistic plant grazing thing. The impact of the sheep compaction is not a worry. I mean, they're grazing the plants, they're manuring, and they're trampling, and all of this has a regenerative impact on the soil. But in the vineyard, it was just a simple problem of geometry. I mean, the size of these animals. We have a breed that's like a cross between, in Portuguese, they're called Merino Branco and Ilha de France. And it's all art. And the vine rows are with, wires, and they're, it's a 2-meter alley between the vine rows. And it just wasn't manageable the way we move the sheep in the pastures is with either electric netting or hurdles, like solid grates that we move. So I'm just very curious how this works, like in practical terms, running the sheep through a vineyard without getting them tangled up in a way that they're contained and, controlled from, they can't run away, and the risk of predators is contained. Can you explain a little bit about the operational, how it works?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we have done a lot of trial and error we're really good at. So what we've done is we started in 2008 in Oregon and working with an organic vineyard up there. And they had, tractor costs and fuel costs had gone way up. And what we kind of come down to over 15, 16 years of idiocracy at this point is 500 sheep, 10 to 15 acres, 3 to 5 days. And you move the sheep. So the soil compaction does happen when they trail for water. So what the goal is to move the water every other day, put it in a different location so they don't all start lining out. What happens with the compaction is when they all line out and go towards one direction at the same time. So water placement is or salt, any kind of need that the animal needs, you got to move that around, and then move the sheep every 5 days. So you have a high animal impact over a short duration of time. And then we try to only graze one spot twice in a whole year. So,
well, and also like rain. If it rains, we try to move a day earlier.
Quicker, yeah.
Like then there's feed, like maybe leave a little feed on the ground just so that it doesn't get mud. They're not,
trampling. And
that mud.
So
down.
this is all depending. So
Yeah.
like put it in a picture of that it could change tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've started with that process. We try to, in January, we usually have enough rain and a good enough forage cover in this part of California where we can start the process. And what we do is we do a 50 or a 40% graze in January. And the reason we do this is if we don't graze anything in April 15th is bud break, we run into a wall of grass we can never get through. Because it's like, if you figure there's 3 to 4 ton per acre of dry matter in these vineyards on April 1st. So what we've tried to do is run a sheep through, and then we've timed our lambing to be, the lambs are born in October, November. So when we turn out in January, they're 40 pounds. And when we wean them in April, they're 100 pounds. So as the grass is getting bigger and growing faster, the lambs are getting bigger and eating more. And the mothers are then lactating more and eating more. And so our consumption rises with the grass growth. And then, and so that's kind of the predator situation is with electric fence. We quit using permanent fence about 4 years ago because mountain lions will climb over the permanent fence. And we go about 3-4 foot back, and we use electric fence in, around every field. And then we have a Great Pyrenees Anatolian Marama cross, one of those breeds, what we call white dogs or a livestock protection dog. And we'll have at least one dog in every group. And then that kind of changes. There's industry differences for those as well. A lot of people are going towards Anatolians and Akboshes at this point. And we kind of are as well.
But we use 3-wire fence, and then
there's 2 different ways. So we use a 3-wire fence because we can put up more efficient. So most of the reasons that we've been very growthy, I don't know how to, I'm not going to use the word successful because we like to fail a lot. But the reason why we've expanded so much in sheep, in the vineyard thing specifically, is I pretty much spent every waking hour since 2005 figuring out how to move fence fast. So efficiencies in electric fence movement, we're the only sheep company so far in California that runs that 3-wire electric fence. Everybody else is putting out the electric netting, which is 165-foot rolls of electrified netting. And they're not going to be able, it's more secure both for the sheep and for predators. But with the cost of labor, I think in 2012 or 14, they came out with what our cost of labor was going to be. So I really, really started focusing in on the efficiencies in fence. So our fencing situation is quite a bit further because a lot of people have just started, last 5 years, 4 years in vineyard grazing. I've literally been focusing on vineyard grazing since 2000.
But you're right. If you go throw sheep out in a vineyard, it can be kind of interesting. You've got to train the border collies to work the vineyard to gather the sheep because, like, going under the wires, it's really funny to see a border collie go out the first time and hit. They always get messed up eyebrows. It's like they hit right on their eyebrows. But you got to train the dogs and the guys. I mean, you can't just it's tricky to move them from field to field and all that stuff. And it just kind of.
Well, the dogs learn to go down the row to the end of the row and then bring the sheep to you. The first time I went into a vineyard, the dog was trying to push it through the rows towards me, like not with the row, but against the row, because he just didn't understand why the sheep couldn't run straight towards me. Mm-hmm. And like the dogs, since 2008, all of our dogs are kind of vineyard dogs, and they just push them to the roadways. Like they work with the vineyard. And then, we've had whatever train wreck. If you want to hear train wreck stories, we got a couple of hours for that. But
the wiring, I mean, they do some like damage. I think that like drip lines has been one thing that vineyard owners have said they'll do a little damage.
And Fetzer, and most of the people we've been working with we've been with Fetzer for 11, 12 years now, 13. And when they update their drip line, they make all of it's internal now. So instead of having external emitters, they're internal. Like they're updating, I would say Treasury and Fetzer, Shannon Ranches, Kendall Jackson, they're all focused on making sheep-friendly vineyards, which also is, I think, and there's a lot of countless small ones are all kind of focusing on it now. And a lot of the construction currently with even with vineyard managing companies are building sheep-friendly vineyards with the internal emitters and the drip line to the end rows being at least 2 to 4 feet off of the road instead of put the end post at the road, because there's no place for the sheep to turn at the end of the vineyard.
That's our situation too.
Yeah. And so sheep is a tractor. And so you have to then give it room like a tractor to turn around.
Yeah. Wow, this is just total mind opener. Like here, it's not a thing at all. It's an absolutely from outer space idea to be running sheep through a vineyard. But it sounds like there, you say Kendall Jackson is totally focused on making sheep-friendly vineyards. I mean, it's the way to
They're
do
buying
it.
their own. Yeah, they're buying their own sheep. The grandson, I believe, he's got like 400 or 500 sheep, and they're going to try to do their own sheep. That's going to fail, and it's not going to. I'm a little worried about that part, but we do all the hard stuff, and they do all the easy stuff. But we run about 2,000 to 4,000 sheep through Kendall Jackson, in the Napa Valley and the Upper Napa Valley. Treasury does about 2,800 acres. Treasury Family Estate or Treasury Vineyard Estates, or they're an Australian held company. Bonterra does 1,000 acres. Shannon Ranches probably does close to 2,000 or 3,000 acres, including the stuff that they manage. Mondavi's been doing vineyards, sheep with vineyards for like at least 13, 14 since I've been down here. Krug, they're all kind of focusing in on this. Labor is becoming expensive. It's not just hitting the sheep guys, these vineyard guys with the overtime rules. It's really changing the vineyard management as well. And so I do believe if we can manage it correctly, the situation correctly, and don't overcharge any one person and just kind of keep it moderate to everybody. But it is at scale. The only way the sheep thing works in a vineyard is at scale. If you go out with 20 or 30 sheep, you can never get the impact. You stay too long in one area, and you can't make a small enough area. You can't make a small enough area to make it work. We've tried a little bit of everything, and the smallest number of sheep that works for us is 400. Yeah, make it work.
Well, that's kind of carbon credit needs to kind of reflect that.
And I believe the carbon credit kind of has to reflect that, because I call it the token 5 sheep that they put in front of the tasting room, and they're doing more harm than good. They don't change. It's permanent water structures, it's permanent feeding areas, and soil compaction. Like, yeah, the sheep are there and it looks cool, but that's not regenerative. Where we've found the most and best results has been with higher numbers of sheep and quicker movement. And what we've tried to work with, we're actually in our industry right now. We're working with some of the guys at UC Davis to try to build grazing associations. So instead of me jumping over 3 other people and going and grazing one, that we all work together, and maybe I give up 2 vineyards that are right next to theirs, and we can be more efficient and kind of keep out of each other's way, but also work together in number, because there's a lot to it. I don't have any of the answers. I have a lot of questions. But we know what we've tried, and I can give you examples of what we've tried and what has or hasn't worked. But, it's a bigger thing than you think. I think we grazed 8,000 acres last year in vineyards. And I don't know for sure because I've never sat down and added it up, but it's well over 5,000 acres.
I would just love to see this working. Are there YouTube videos of sheep grazing in vineyards, or is there a channel, or do you have?
No, my wife has an Instagram account that she makes fun of us on regularly. And she takes a lot of pictures and a lot of videos of kind of keeps everybody up to date with what we're doing. And then, there's a lot of people going. So like this last year, we kind of have a little association. There's about 5 of us that work together, and I run everybody's sheep through vineyard season. And like the last 4, 5, 6 days, I've been hauling sheep to one of the guys that we work with. His name's Grant, and he's going to take everybody's sheep for the next 2 to 3 months. And he's going to manage the whole situation, and we're going to kind of sit down a little bit and take a deep breath once the sheep get there. And then everybody kind of has their role. in their time of year that they step up and kind of do their thing. And then you can get really good at, like I focus on the vineyard stuff. That's what I do. And so instead of me owning all the sheep, we owned 3,000 sheep last year. We grazed 20,000 sheep in the vineyards. So, it's more of that. I think you're going to have to build groups of people that work together. And I think part of the thing with the regen thing is going to be that as well, is we can all work together. Like if Kendall Jackson's got one vineyard next to Treasury, that's got one next to what's the name? Anyway, let's say, then that whole group would then work together. What we've been doing with our group is giving those guys discounts. So if we can get them to work together and then put gates in between property lines, then we'll give them a $10 to $20 to $40 an acre break on our rate that we charge them.
Okay.
But yeah, my wife. Yeah, sorry, my wife's telling me I need to be quiet.
When I take the conversation in some slightly different direction, and going back to the original problem statement, that as you were laying out the economics, had a lot to do with the cost of labor and those regulatory increases. And in thinking about the allocation of the funds from the credits, I'm wondering, Ned, whether there would be a way, perhaps through a nonprofit or through the MRV team that's conducting the research and verifying the data, to be able to pay the employees, the folks in the field, to do that work, to take part of that 15% and either directly, and I don't know who the project proponent is in this scenario, but to give them access to that 15% in a way that they could use as their workforce, the team that the grazers are hiring, and make that a separately funded, kind of in the way that absorbs some of these increases that are making their economics so tenuous, to use some of that 15%, since the goal in my mind, and I may not understand MRV well enough, is we want this to be field work, that we want to use the right tools, but to the extent we're sending money to distant laboratories to run complex analyses, we're kind of missing the point, which is why I'm really intrigued that you just did rough justice in saying it's 1,000 hours is our unit of measure, and now we're getting the data verified. Well, anyway, that was just a long way of coming up with a short thought, because the carbon trust model and the issue we've not yet reached, which is why I queried before about the allocation between the vineyards and the grazers, is to set up a process by which the whole picture is examined by folks around the table, to convene and get all the different interests, which in your case certainly includes the labor, to get them funded and get them trained in a way they can keep up with your innovation. And in respect to the carbon credits or the eco credits, to be the instrument for giving them validity, for get them the right tools and training, so they're out in the field and not just watching the sheep, but really counting, instead of counting sheep, they're counting carbon too, or in addition to. So anyway, that was just a thought, that if there's a way in this allocation to earmark part of the MRV funds to go back in to fund the labor, at least to gross up some of the wage increases that are the burden. That struck me as a way to integrate some of the many connections that this project draws.
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that FiberShed has done that I don't think was part of the grant, but during the research part of it was they had probably 2 or 3 people spend probably 10 to 20 hours a year each training our guys on the mapping systems to do all the figuring out on that. And I don't know if that's where you spend the money, because that's a lot to get our guys up and going, the software, to do it, and then also the training part of it. And those guys, I think, just volunteered their time, and they're amazing humans. There's a guy named Ben. I'd marry him if I could. If Jamie hadn't crapped me already, but the amount of time he spent talking to our guys through issues, to get accurate, because the thing at the end of the day is it's got to be accurate. We want to give, because if we're doing research on top of the carbon credits, and we can use the data for research and further, so part of it to me would be the platform in which we're using, and education in using it.
Well,
I can
sounds
follow
like,
up. Oh, go ahead, Howard.
I was just going to add, I mean, I guess in the scheme of things, the organization that I'm involved in is kind of like the fiber shed, where we're right now working on biochar and looking to extend into regenerative agriculture up in Northwest Washington. So we're place-based in a very different kind of bioregion with a different crop mix than you have in California. And then we're really struggling because it's expensive to get the data, and we're trying to do with foundation grants, but it really would be better to build it into the system so that it's something that is priced in and everybody involved understands the role and the importance of that role, to giving people confidence that the results are real. And when I heard that your existential issues, your labor costs are out of control, I just thought there might be a way to close the loop by getting at least part of your employees' times attributable to that pool of money.
And I can, at least tell you what went through my mind putting this together. And like I said before, it's imperfect. And right now I am the project proponent. And so because it's a pilot and it was simple and we just wanted to have something easy to run. For this next grazing season, we're going to be hopefully working with another project proponent that's actually knows about sheep grazing and has been knows about the interactions and knows the players in this whole thing. So it would be a different, completely different, and he would be able to make adjustments to the methodology for another version and things like that based on more common sense of what's really going on. As far as the MRV, from our perspective, the MRV data that is being collected by the shepherds, and that just includes, on their app, they mark when the grazing started, when it stopped, the height of the grass at the beginning, the height at the end, the number of sheep that were grazed. They drive around the perimeter of the fence, so we know the location of the grazing area, the area of the grazing area, all that stuff. So from our perspective, that's the MRV data, and that is being collected by the shepherds. They're not getting kind of a separate thing for that. That's part of the 65% that's going to the shepherds. As far as collecting the environmental data, it's not completely removed, but it's outside of the valuing of the credit itself. That's probably, and Robert and Jamie, you can correct me if this isn't accurate, but my perception is that that's outside of what they would be able to do, because they are busy all the time watching sheep. They don't have time to be out there taking soil samples. I mean, even just using this phone app is, it's a deliberate thing that takes some of their time. And for me, it's easy to say, all you got to do is push a few buttons. It's easy, but just from my own experience working in the field and stuff, nothing is easy. When you've got, and I can imagine having 400, 500 sheep running around, nothing is easy. You can't take your eye off, and you can't just, start doing some sampling protocol. So I think it's probably best to keep it separate. And maybe Robert or Jamie, if you have
we've struggled with this with our guys. We get about a 70% success rate in them mapping, I would say. And it actually depends on the guy. And we've paid $1,000 bonuses with the help of Fibershed over the years for anybody who got at least 70% of their vineyards grazed or mapped. So we've been kind of doing the bonus system with Fibershed's been helping us with that. We do a match share deal with them. So if Fibershed gives us $3,000, anyway, long story short, we double whatever Fibershed gives us and they get the bonus. But I think that at this point, we're going to make it a terminal. If you don't put the data in, you're fired, because we're past the breaking point. And in all honesty, we're paying the people enough money to do their jobs. You know, like once you get to $5,000 a month, plus room and board and airfare and a cell phone and everything else, you're talking about $100,000 a year. You can get just about anybody in the world to come out and work for you at $100,000. That's not true. Nobody wants to herd sheep, but the amount of money, once you start talking about that kind of money, then your expectations, when this thing first started, my expectations were really low. And now my expectations are, because of the amount of, like I told my guys the other day, we were kind of having it, we're actually struggling with this on other things as well, is that my expectations with them are higher, and it wasn't because of their qualifications. It was because I have to pay them more money. And so the people that were good enough for the job 4 years ago, 10 years ago, aren't good enough for the job anymore, because they are, like my example is they're stenographers, or they hand wrote letters, and now they need to run a computer. And if you're not going to learn how to type and not learn the computer software, then we've got to move on, because today's world is requiring a different, which is good and bad. I'm really torn both ways. We've had to let some guys go over the last couple of years that would have had a job and been positive to society. I'm going to go down a wormhole for a second, but been positive towards society with lower expectations. And our expectations now, because of the cash situation, is really, I'm struggling with it personally. I'm not fighting against it. I've kind of, in the beginning of this time, I never kind of outwardly outspoken against the price increase and the labor increase, because I told my guys that one day I want to pay them $100,000 a year. I want them to be worth that and pay them that. I would be a successful manager and company, a lead or whatever. And that would mean that they were a good group of people that were working for me, and that they learned and grew. But what's happening is, it's not the learning and growing. They're just getting the money, and I'm letting people go that I don't think that they deserve a job, just with lower expectations. So I'm really struggling with it now. I'm wishing I would have fought it a little harder at the beginning, and because it's sad to watch people go. I got to let 2 more guys go, because they refuse to do the mapping, and the mapping is part of the future. And they're the 2 guys. If I get rid of those 2 guys, we'll be at 100%.
Yeah, thanks for that. Does that help, Howard? Does that?
Yeah, no, that's the from the ground look that, and it makes a lot of sense that the reality is it's baked into the job, and the fact that you're having to pay more reflects 2 realities: the regulatory pressure you're under and the expectations of how the role has changed with the nature of the work. So that's a very sensible explanation, and it's great that your mindset is reflecting that reality, and has the generosity of spirit to know that it's win-win when the value added shows up in your pocket and theirs.
Good. Are there any? Oh, let me just go back to one thing that was being talked about before, and one of the questions people often ask me about the kilo sheep hour is, why don't you just use number of hectares grazed? And I think Robert was addressing this, is that having like 1 sheep on 30 hectares isn't the same as having 500 sheep on a few hectares for a couple days kind of thing. So it's a very different kind of practice, and the outcomes are very different. So we're trying to get people to be using this high density, short duration grazing. And if it was just by area, we might not be able to do that. So that's why, I mean, and if we can come up with something better than a kilo sheep hour, I'm certainly happy to do that. It's just, as this was coming, for the first version of this, the kilo sheep hour seemed to make sense. But if there's a better way to do it, certainly want to hear about it.
Well, Ned, I mean, this stuff a whole lot better than me, and we're just always looking for proxies that make sense to correlate the health of the soil, other than the expensive laboratory testing. And ours grazing with sheep is certainly that, and understanding why not every hour is created equal. You have to have the density, and you have to have the movement, and without that, and I let me just query then, in the way that unit of measure, it presupposes or requires that the other standards are met about the periodic movement and the density being adequate to achieve the result. So that's the price of admission, and then the 1,000 is the unit of measure.
Yeah.
Well, in another conversation, I'd like to come up with proxies that work on farm fields for the kinds of crops we're looking at in our region.
In your region, do you do like does one of the biggest things to go, like, so my whole thing is like, where do you take the sheep after the vineyard, right? Like, that's why Kendall Jackson's sheep flock is going to run into roadblocks, is they have nowhere to go. Once they're finished grazing their vineyards, where are they going to put the sheep? Now they're buying stuff to feed them. And we've been working with farmers in cover crops, and so rice, tomato, walnuts, pears, kind of everything. We talked to a Kiwi farmer this summer for planting cover crops and then going into the next system. And so one of the things that would be really kind of substantial to do for me, just talking to farmers, is having a spreadsheet sitting there kind of expressing what the sheep are doing out there, or livestock, or just carbon in general. And then the USDA pays quite a bit of money for a cover crop to be planted, and have that for each state, for each region, for each crop, so that these grazers have got something that doesn't look like me, my mental handicap thing, going out there and saying this is what's happening and trying to talk them into it, and having it. Because I think once you get the stacked, what's crazy is the organic farmers are always the way I get in the door. They're the ones that are willing to try it. And my biggest growth has been in the conventional stuff. I've got 2 conventional farmers now that are planting cover crops, that are switching over, and they're not selling as organic. They're just farming organic and selling conventionally, because they're seeing the incentivized, methods. And sometimes, because they were willing to try the cover crop and the sheep, instead of using the sheep, they hay the cover crop, and they, because they're willing to do other things. But it getting the incentive to try to put green back on the ground year round for farming, I think is the vineyard's a good section of the year. It's the wet season when you can't be out on the farm fields. And then that other part of the year is the farm ground and those cover crops and how you integrate into it. And that'll be how, I don't know how you do that, but I'm currently, we've got to hire a grant writer and just start writing research grants just daily, because one of the things about the conventional thing, the changeover is I want to do research, which I think would incentivize people to do the carbon credit, is how much less chemicals are being sprayed in the conventional world, sheep, no sheep. And then that would incentivize people to buy the credits, to get people to put the sheep, because they know that, that'll be one, just besides carbon, it would be the chemical. And I know one particular farmer, he's completely quit putting out pre-emergent, and he's down to like a quarter of his application of glyphosate. And if we can kind of, you know, maybe it's a little bit of everything that swings the pendulum, you know, one way. Sorry, my wife's yelling at me again. I got to be quiet.
Hey, you got a question?
Yeah, sorry I showed up late, but heard the last little bit here, last 15 minutes or so, and yeah, it is an issue. I mean, one thing for sheep is that's happening. I have a buddy in Indiana who just got a contract with BP that has a 900-acre solar array. And so dual purpose solar is, especially where it's, you know, that's a huge advantage. I mean, we can plant all kinds of diverse species and be pollinator habitats and manage that with sheep because, you know, you can't have a big animal like a cow, and goats don't work very good because they'll just jump up on top of them. So, and as you said, with cover crops, the more people are doing cover crops that do crop production, a lot of them just don't have any experience and don't want to have the livestock. So it opens up opportunities for service grazing on those cover crops. So it is really important to have a diversified situation for people that are doing grazing, especially because I think there's I started raising sheep many, many years ago, and I look at it now. I used to call myself a median strip farmer just because I had to travel around and I would consult setting up farms, and they would let me bring my breeding flock with me. And so I see that, you know, for a lot of new farmers getting in, they don't have to have as much land if they can just manage the breeding stock, and then they can move it around to different services, whether it be vineyards, whether it be crop production, or whether it be solar arrays. But it's a matter of creating that system so that, you know, they have full-time grazing.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. All right. Any other questions? We're at the top of the hour. Did anybody else want to ask anything or comment? Or
I just want to offer the thumbs up on the service grazing concept. I think I hadn't heard it phrased that way, but it brings it together.
all right. Well, thank you everybody for showing up, and especially Robert and Jamie. Thank you for showing up. I really enjoyed this. It's a small group, but a super interesting conversation for me, at least. This has been really helpful. So we'll meet again in a month, and there's also on next Tuesday is the Regen Network community meeting, and I think Robert and Jamie may be there, and also some other people from the Fiber Shed project. So we'll see how that goes.
Is there an invite circulating for that? I don't know that I have that on my calendar. It's next Wednesday?
Tuesday. Next Tuesday is the Regen Network. It's a registry and foundation community call.
All right, I'll see if I can find a connection to it. Okay, thanks for the head.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I learned a lot.